They say an Alpha King's touch can heal kingdoms, but his restraint can destroy them. You've seen the records from the Moon Council archives. You've heard the whispers about the Omega healer who dared to break sacred law, but you haven't heard the truth. The official tribunal report from the night of the crescent moon states that Henrietta Vale touched the Alpha King to save his life. That is incomplete. When Henrietta collapsed at the moon altar 3 weeks later, poisoned and bleeding, the council that condemned her stood frozen. And when she fell, the man who caught her wasn't any healer or guard. It was the king who had been forbidden to touch her at all. This is the untold story of the night Ashfall's laws shattered and a bond ignited that nearly tore the kingdom apart. Date: Night of the Blood Moon. 3 weeks after the healing location, the Moon Altar, Royal District of Ashfall. Subject: Henrietta Vale, 24, Omega Healer. The cold of the altar stone wasn't just temperature, it was judgment made solid. Henrietta knelt at the base of the moon altar, her wrists bound in silver that burned against her skin. Every breath dragged through her lungs like broken glass. She looked down at her hands, the hands that had saved the Alpha King's life. They trembled now, veins darkening with poison, the same silver toxin that had nearly killed Elijah Stormborn. Ironic, she thought distantly. They're killing me with the very thing I drew from him. 4 weeks ago, Henrietta had been the kingdom's most trusted healer. She tended the royal gardens. She mended broken bones in the healing wing. And she had been quietly, impossibly, falling in love with a king she was forbidden to touch. He had never promised her anything. That was the cruelest part. Elijah Stormborn didn't make promises he couldn't keep, but his eyes had promised. The way he remembered her name when he forgot others. The way he found reasons to walk past the healing wing. The way he had looked at her that night by the fire when she'd admitted she hated silence, and he'd whispered, "Neither do I." Then came the rogue attack, the silver blade, the council's cold decree. Guide only, no contact. And Henrietta's choice, the choice that damned her to press her palms to his chest anyway and let the bond ignite. "Stand, Omega." Henrietta flinched. Elder Moira's voice cut through the night like a blade. The council member descended the altar steps, her ceremonial robes trailing behind her like a shroud. Henrietta had known Moira since childhood. The elder had once praised her gift. Now she looked at Henrietta like something to be erased. "Elijah," Henrietta rasped, her voice ruined from 3 days of interrogation in the council chambers. "Is the king—" "Alpha King Stormborn," Moira corrected icily, "is preparing for his mating ceremony with Lady Seraphine of the Southern Reach. He is ensuring the future of this kingdom." Her lips curved into something cruel. "You should be grateful. He argued for exile instead of execution." Exile. As if being torn from the bond wouldn't kill her just as surely. Henrietta's gaze dropped to the cracked stone beneath her. The evidence lay in the council's records. Testimony from 3 witnesses who claim they saw her manipulate the bond. A healer's journal, not hers, detailing bond magic she'd never studied. A vial of bonding accelerant found in her quarters. A vial she had never seen in her life. "I didn't force anything," she whispered, a tear cutting through the dust on her cheek. "Please, let me speak to him. Just once. I need him to know—" "You'll speak when the moon judges you," Moira spat, stepping back, "if you survive the cleansing." The elder didn't offer a hand to help her stand. When Henrietta tried to rise, her legs gave out, after effects of the poison they'd already administered, the preparation dose for the ritual. One of the guards, a wolf named Theron, who'd once smiled at her in the gardens, stepped forward reflexively, then stopped himself. Helping her would be treason now. She was alone, bound, condemned. And somewhere in the royal palace, Elijah Stormborn was preparing to marry someone else. Before we continue, Please hit the subscribe and like button and tell me which city you're tuning in from. I love to know where this story found you. Now let's dive in. Chapter 1. The Law That Forbade Touch. They say an alpha king's touch can heal kingdoms, but his restraint can destroy them. You've seen the records from the Moon Council archives. You've heard the whispers about the Omega healer who dared to break sacred law. But you haven't heard the truth. The official tribunal report from the night of the crescent moon states that Henrietta Vale touched the Alpha King to save his life. That is incomplete. When Henrietta collapsed at the moon altar 3 weeks later, poisoned and bleeding, the council that condemned her stood frozen. And when she fell, the man who caught her wasn't any healer or guard. It was the king who had been forbidden to touch her at all. This is the untold story of the night Ashfall's laws shattered, and a bond ignited that nearly tore the kingdom apart. Date: night of the blood moon, 3 weeks after the healing location, the moon altar, Royal District of Ashfall. Subject: Henrietta Vale, 24, Omega healer. The cold of the altar stone wasn't just temperature, it was judgment made solid. Henrietta knelt at the base of the moon altar, her wrists bound in silver that burned against her skin. Every breath dragged through her lungs like broken glass. Moonlight spilled across the sacred ground, illuminating the circle of council elders who surrounded her like vultures. She looked down at her hands, the hands that had saved the Alpha King's life. They trembled now, their veins darkening with poison. The same silver toxin that had nearly killed Elijah Stormborn 4 weeks ago. Ironic, she thought distantly. They're killing me with the very thing I drew from him. 4 weeks ago, Henrietta had been the kingdom's most trusted healer. She tended the royal gardens where moonflowers bloomed only for Omegas with the gift. She mended broken bones in the healing wing. She worked quietly, efficiently, asking for nothing. And she had been secretly, impossibly, falling in love with a king she was forbidden to touch. In the dominion of Ashfall, the laws were absolute. Royal blood could not touch Omega blood unless a mating bond had been approved by the Moon Council. Not a hand, not a wrist, not even in mercy. The law existed to prevent weak bonds, unions believed to destabilize kingdoms, to dilute alpha bloodlines, to create emotional chaos in rulers who needed cold clarity. Omegas were assigned mates by councils, chosen for genetic compatibility and political advantage. Kings married for power. Desire was irrelevant. Love had been outlawed long before Henrietta was born. And Elijah Stormborn had ruled Ashfall with iron restraint for 7 years, never breaking a law, never bending a rule, never even brushing fingers with an Omega during public healings. Until her. He had never promised her anything. That was the cruelest part. Elijah Stormborn didn't make promises he couldn't keep, but his eyes had promised. The way he remembered her name when he forgot court officials. The way he found reasons to walk past the healing wing when she worked late. The way he had looked at her that night by the hearth, when she'd admitted she hated silence. And he'd whispered, "Neither do I." Then came the rogue attack, a coordinated strike on the inner city. Elijah had returned to the palace wounded, silver blade poison burning through his veins. No healer could reach him in time. They were all tending to civilian casualties in the lower districts, except Henrietta. She'd been dragged into the royal chamber by guards, her hands bound behind her back as a precaution. The council had surrounded the king's bed, arguing protocol while he choked on his own blood. "Do not touch him," Elder Moira had commanded. "Guide the magic only. Your hands must not make contact." But when Elijah's heart had stopped, when the monitors had flatlined and his skin had turned gray, instinct had shattered law. Henrietta had lunged forward, ripping free of the guards. She'd pressed her palms to his chest, and pouring everything she had into him, healing magic, desperation, the unspoken bond that had been whispering between them for months. And the bond had ignited. The room had exploded with light. Elijah's eyes had opened, gold and blazing. He'd gasped her name. Not healer, not Omega, her name. And for one perfect, damning moment, his hand had closed over hers. The council had torn them apart seconds later, but it was too late. The bond had awakened, and in Ashfall, that was an unforgivable crime. "Stand, Omega." Henrietta flinched. Elder Moira's voice cut through the memory like a blade. The council member descended the altar steps, her ceremonial robes trailing behind her like a burial shroud. Moira had once praised Henrietta's gift, called her a blessing to the kingdom. Now she looked at her like something to be erased. "Elijah," Henrietta rasped, her voice ruined from 3 days of interrogation in the council's stone chambers. "Is the king coming?" Moira's expression hardened. "Alpha King Stormborn is preparing for his mating ceremony with Lady Seraphine of the Southern Reach. He is ensuring the future of this kingdom. You should be grateful." He argued for exile instead of execution. Exile, as if being torn from the bond wouldn't kill her just as surely. Henrietta's gaze dropped to the cracked stone beneath her knees. The evidence lay scattered in the council's records, testimony from 3 witnesses who claimed they'd seen her manipulate the bond using dark magic. A healer's journal, not hers, detailing bond acceleration spells she'd never studied. A vial of bonding serum found hidden beneath her mattress. A vial she had never seen in her life. "I didn't force anything," she whispered hoarsely. A tear slid down her cheek, cutting through the dust and bruises. "Please, let me speak to him. Just once. I need him to know I didn't—" "You'll speak when the moon judges you," Moira interrupted coldly. "If you survive the cleansing." The elder turned away, dismissing her. When Henrietta tried to stand, her legs buckled. The poison, the preparation dose they'd forced down her throat an hour ago, was spreading faster than expected. Her vision blurred. The silver in her blood burned hotter. One of the guards, a young wolf named Theron who'd once smiled at her in the gardens, stepped forward reflexively, then stopped himself, remembering. Helping her would be treason now. Henrietta collapsed forward, her bound hands unable to catch her fall. Her cheek struck stone. Blood pooled beneath her face, warm against the cold altar. "This is how it ends," she thought dimly. "Alone, on my knees, while he marries someone else." But somewhere deep in her chest, beneath the poison and the pain, the bond pulsed. Once, twice. And in the royal palace, a king who had never broken a law felt his heart stop. Chapter 2. The Untouchable King. 4 weeks earlier. Location: the Royal Palace, Ashfall. Subject: Elijah Stormborn, Alpha King. The council members didn't speak in Elijah's presence. They whispered. Even the oldest wolves, warriors who had fought in the border wars, elders who remembered when alphas ruled by blood and fang alone, kept their eyes lowered when the Alpha King entered a room. It wasn't fear of violence. Elijah Stormborn had never needed to raise his voice, let alone his hand. It was the discipline that unnerved them, the absolute control. 7 years on the throne, and he had never broken a single law. Never indulged a temper, never chosen desire over duty. Other kings kept concubines, bent regulations for pleasure, ruled with passion as much as strategy. Elijah Stormborn ruled like a man carved from stone. "Your Majesty," Elder Thaddeus said carefully as Elijah reviewed border reports in the council chamber, "the Southern Reach has again proposed a union between yourself and Lady Seraphine. The political advantages? No." Elijah didn't look up from the documents. "With respect, my king, you are 31, unmated. The kingdom needs—" "I said no." The temperature in the room dropped. Thaddeus bowed and retreated. What the council didn't know, what no one knew except the palace seer who died 2 winters ago, was that Elijah had been told his fate the night of his coronation. Your mate walks among your people, the seer had whispered, eyes white with prophecy. But she is forbidden. To claim her is to lose everything. To deny her is to become nothing. What does that mean? Elijah had demanded. It means you must choose, the crown or your soul. For 7 years, Elijah had chosen the crown. He had buried the prophecy, followed every law, kept every tradition, touched no Omega, entertained no bond, felt nothing, until 3 months ago, when a healer with quiet eyes and steady hands had mended a child's broken arm in the palace garden, and something in Elijah's chest had cracked open for the first time since his coronation. He had made himself stay away from her. It was the law. It was his duty. It had nearly killed him. The rogue attack came without warning, coordinated, brutal, silver-bladed weapons specifically designed to poison alpha blood. By the time Elijah's forces drove them back, the inner city was in chaos, and the king was dying. He staggered into the throne room, blood soaking through his armor. His second-in-command, Commander Rylan, caught him before he fell. "Get the healers," Rylan barked at the guards. "No." Elijah's voice was already weakening. "Civilians first. The lower districts. You're dying, Your Majesty." "That's an order." The council arrived within minutes, flooding the chamber with argument and procedure. Elder Moira insisted on protocol. Elder Thaddeus debated which healer had seniority. Someone suggested waiting for the head physician to return from the southern provinces. All while silver poison crawled through Elijah's veins like liquid fire. "There's no time for this." Rylan slammed his fist on the council table. "Someone get a healer. Now." "All the senior healers are in the districts," Moira said coldly. "We cannot risk an untrained Omega." "Then who's left?" Rylan demanded. A young guard spoke up hesitantly. "Henrietta Vale is here, Commander. She was treating patients in the East Wing when the attack began." The name hit Elijah like a second blade. "No. Absolutely not," Moira snapped. "She's unmarked, unbonded. The law forbids. The law can burn." Rylan's eyes were wild. "He's dying. Get her!" Elijah tried to speak, to refuse, to protect her from what he knew would happen if she touched him. But his tongue was lead, his vision blurred. He felt his heart stutter, skip, struggle. Henrietta. He had avoided her for 3 months, refused to meet her eyes, walked past the healing wing without stopping even when everything in him screamed to go to her. And now she would be dragged into this, forced to save him, forced to break the law, or forced to watch him die. The chamber doors slammed open. Through the haze of pain, Elijah saw her, hands bound behind her back, flanked by 2 guards who gripped her arms like she was a criminal. Her healer's robes were stained with blood from the patients she'd been treating. Her hair had come loose from its braid. Her face was pale but steady. Their eyes met. The bond whispered. It was the first time Elijah had looked directly at her in 3 months, and even dying, even poisoned. The recognition slammed into him with the force of truth. He knew her, not from the palace, not from the gardens. He knew her the way he knew his own heartbeat. Forbidden, the prophecy had said. Of course it was her. Henrietta stumbled slightly as the guards shoved her forward. Her gaze swept over him, cataloging injuries, calculating damage, and something fierce and protective flared in her eyes before she controlled it. "Omega healer Henrietta Vale," Moira announced formally. "You will guide your magic to extract the poison from the king's blood. You will not make physical contact. Is this understood?" "Yes, Elder." Henrietta's voice was steady, but Elijah heard the tremor underneath. She knelt beside where he'd been laid on the council table, her bound hands still behind her back. One of the guards cut the ropes. Her wrists were raw from the bindings. Elijah wanted to speak, wanted to tell her to refuse, to run, to let him die rather than risk what this would cost her. But his body was failing. His heart hammered erratically. Silver fire consumed his veins. Guide only, Moira repeated sharply. No contact. Henrietta's hands hovered over his chest, shaking. Elijah could feel her magic reaching for him, careful, controlled, trying to obey the law even as her instincts screamed otherwise. It wasn't enough. The poison was too deep. His heart was stopping. It's not working, someone said, panicked. She's not strong enough. Get another. Elijah's vision went black. His heart stopped. And in that moment of absolute darkness, he heard her voice. I'm sorry. Then warmth. Pressure. Hands pressed to his chest. Skin to skin. Law be damned. Power exploded through him. Not just healing magic. Not just her gift. The bond ignited like a star-going nova, flooding every cell of his body with light and fire and the absolute, unshakable certainty that she was his and he was hers. And nothing, not law, not council, not kingdom, would ever change that. Elijah's eyes flew open. Gold light blazed from them. He gasped, lungs filling with air for the first time in minutes, and his hand, moving without conscious thought, closed over hers. Henrietta. Not healer, not Omega. Her name. The name he'd memorized. The name he'd whispered alone in the dark when discipline failed and he let himself imagine a different life. The council exploded into chaos. Guards surged forward, ripping her away from him. She cried out as they dragged her back. Elijah tried to rise, tried to reach for her. But Rylan and two others pinned him down. The bond! Moira's voice was shrill with horror. She forced the bond. I didn't! Henrietta's voice cracked. I just wanted to arrest her. No! Elijah roared, finding his strength. She saved my life. She broke the law, Your Majesty. Moira's eyes were cold. And you know what that means. Elijah stared at Henrietta as the guards bound her wrists again. Her eyes were wide, terrified, but not of arrest. She was terrified of what she'd felt when she touched him, the same thing he'd felt. Forbidden. The prophecy had been right. Loving her would cost him everything. Chapter 3. The moment the bond awoke. The moment Henrietta's palms touched Elijah's chest, the world split open. Pain first, searing, absolute, as the silver poison recognized a new host and tried to flood into her. Henrietta gasped, her magic flaring instinctively to create a barrier. But she didn't pull away. She couldn't. His heart had stopped. His lips were turning blue. If she let go now, he would die. So she pushed deeper. Her healing magic poured into him like liquid moonlight, seeking out the poison that had wrapped around his heart like thorns. She felt every damaged cell, every weakened vessel, every place the silver had burned through him. The intimacy of it was staggering. She knew his body now more thoroughly than her own. Then something else ignited. Not her magic, not his injury. Something ancient and absolute that lived in the space between their souls. The bond. It didn't whisper this time. It roared. Power exploded outward from the point of contact. The torches lining the council chamber flickered wildly, flames leaping higher, and then guttering low. The air itself seemed to charge, crackling with energy that made every wolf in the room bare their teeth reflexively. The ancient tapestries on the walls rippled as if in an invisible wind. Elijah's eyes flew open, blazing gold, not the warm amber of his usual alpha gaze, but pure molten light. His back arched off the table. He gasped, drawing in a breath that sounded like resurrection. And Henrietta felt it, felt his heart restart under her palms, felt his blood begin to flow clean and strong, felt his life force surge back like a tide. But she also felt something else, the bond snapping into place between them like a lock finding its key. Mine. Something primal whispered in her mind. Ours. Then his hand moved. Despite the chaos, despite the council members shouting. And despite everything, Elijah's hand rose and closed over hers. Their eyes met. For one perfect, impossible moment, the world consisted only of this. His heartbeat steady beneath her palms, his hand warm over hers, his eyes seeing her, truly seeing her, for the first time. "Henrietta," he breathed. Her name in his voice sounded like a prayer. Then reality crashed back. "Get her off him!" Moira shrieked. Guards seized Henrietta's arms, wrenching her backward. She cried out as the bond stretched, protesting the separation with physical pain. Her hands slipped from Elijah's chest, leaving smears of his blood on her palms. The backlash hit her like a hammer. All the poison she'd absorbed, all the magic she'd expended, all the energy the bond had demanded, it crashed over her at once. Her legs gave out. The guards barely caught her before she hit the floor. "She forced it!" Moira's voice seemed to come from very far away. "She used dark magic to create a false bond. That's not—" Henrietta tried to speak, but her tongue wouldn't cooperate. Black spots crowded her vision. "I didn't mean... I just wanted..." The world tilted. Then darkness. Elijah woke in his own chambers, clean bandages wrapped around his torso, the silver poison purged completely from his system. He felt stronger than he had in months, years even, as if something missing had finally been returned to him. Then he remembered. Henrietta. He sat up too quickly, ignoring the dizziness. "Where is she?" Rylan, stationed by the door, stepped forward carefully. "Your Majesty, you should rest." "Where is..." "And she?" "The council has her in the holding cells beneath..." Elijah was on his feet before Ryland finished the sentence. "No, absolutely not. My king, the law, I don't care." Elijah's voice was steel. "She saved my life. She will not be imprisoned like a criminal. The council says she manipulated the bond." "The council is wrong." Elijah moved to his wardrobe, pulling on a clean tunic with sharp, angry movements. "Have her moved to the East Tower. Guest chambers, not cells. Post guards if they insist, but she will be treated with dignity." Rylan hesitated. "Your Majesty, you felt it too, didn't you? The bond." Elijah's hands stilled on the laces of his tunic. He had spent 7 years denying what he felt. 7 years following laws, maintaining discipline, keeping the prophecy buried. 7 years preparing for the day he would have to choose between his crown and his soul. "Yes," he said quietly. "I felt it. What will you do?" Elijah turned to face his oldest friend. "I don't know, but I won't let them hurt her for saving my life. They'll say she's dangerous, that she seduced you with forbidden magic. Then they'll be lying." Elijah's jaw tightened. "I've known her name for 3 months, Rylan. I've watched her in the gardens, healing the children. I've seen her work past midnight in the East Wing, tending to patients everyone else abandoned. I've heard her laugh, once, just once, when she thought no one was listening. He had known all their names. It was a habit he'd developed as king, learning the names of Palace Omegas, acknowledging their service, treating them as more than invisible servants. But Henrietta's name he had memorized, repeated to himself in the dark, whispered like a secret he couldn't tell anyone, least of all himself. "I knew," Elijah said softly, "long before tonight. I just didn't want to admit what it meant." The prophecy echoed in his mind. To claim her is to lose everything. But as he remembered the way she'd looked at him, terrified but determined, her hands steady even as she broke the law to save him, Elijah realized something the seer had never told him. Losing her would cost him more. "Move her to the East Tower," Elijah ordered. "And Rylan, no one touches her, no matter what the council says. And if they demand her execution..." Elijah's eyes flashed gold. "Then they'll have to go through me first." Chapter 4. Fires that should not have been lit. The East Tower chambers were far nicer than a prison cell, but the guards stationed outside made Henrietta's situation clear. She was a prisoner in all but name. For 3 days, she saw no one except the servants who brought meals and the healers who checked her recovery from the bond backlash. No council members, no explanations, and no Elijah. She told herself that was good, safer for both of them. She told herself the ache in her chest was just residual magic, not the bond calling for him. She was lying. On the 4th night, Henrietta sat curled in the window seat, a medical text open in her lap. She wasn't really reading, just staring at the words while her mind replayed the moment his hand had closed over hers. That's the way his voice had broken on her name. The door opened without warning. Elijah stood in the doorway, backlit by torchlight from the corridor. He wore simple clothes, no crown, no formal robes, but he still looked every inch a king. His eyes found hers immediately, and Henrietta felt the bond pulse once, recognition and relief flooding through her. "Your Majesty." She started to rise. "Don't!" He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. The guards outside said nothing. "Please, just stay." Henrietta sank back onto the window seat, her book forgotten. Elijah crossed to the fireplace, adding wood with practiced ease. The silence stretched between them, not comfortable, but not quite awkward either. Heavy with words neither knew how to speak. "I don't like silence," Elijah said suddenly, his back still to her. "Everyone thinks I prefer it, that I'm comfortable with quiet and solitude." He turned to face her, firelight casting shadows across his features. "But the truth is, silence makes me remember things I'd rather forget." Henrietta's fingers tightened on her book. "Neither do I," she whispered. "When it's quiet, I hear everything I'm not supposed to want." Their eyes met. The bond hummed softly between them, and for the first time since it ignited, neither of them tried to fight it. The next evening, Elijah returned, and the evening after that, he never announced himself. He simply appeared at twilight, added wood to the fire, and stayed. Sometimes they talked, carefully neutral topics like books, healing techniques, childhood memories. Sometimes they sat in companionable silence that slowly became less uncomfortable. On the 7th night, Henrietta noticed the bandage on his forearm. "You're hurt!" She was on her feet before thinking, healer's instinct overriding caution. Elijah glanced down at the blood-stained wrapping. "Training accident. It's nothing. Let me see." "Henrietta, please." Her voice caught. "I'm going mad in here with nothing to do. Let me help." He hesitated, then nodded, sat in the chair by the fire, began unwrapping the bandage with stiff movements. Henrietta knelt beside him, her hands hovering over the wound. A deep gash, poorly stitched. She could fix it in seconds, but... "May I?" she asked softly. "Permission?" Elijah's breath hitched. She'd asked permission that night too, even with his life draining away. Even breaking the law, she'd tried to honor his autonomy. "Always," he whispered, and the same word he'd wanted to say that night. "You always have permission." Henrietta's hands trembled as she pressed her palms to his forearm. Healing magic flowed, warm and gentle, but beneath it, the bond pulsed stronger, fed by the contact. She felt his heartbeat through his skin, felt the way his breath quickened, felt the restraint it took for him to sit still and let her touch him when everything in him wanted to pull her closer. She understood. She felt it too. When the wound closed, she didn't pull away immediately. Neither did he. They stayed frozen, her hands on his arm, his eyes on her face, the fire crackling beside them. "Henrietta," he breathed. Then her magic sparked, an involuntary surge of nervous energy, and tiny golden sparks popped across the room like fireflies. One landed on Elijah's shoulder, another in his hair. They stared at each other for a heartbeat. Then Elijah laughed. Not a polite chuckle or a restrained smile. A real laugh, deep and genuine and utterly unguarded. It transformed his entire face, erasing years of careful control. Henrietta clapped a hand over her mouth, mortified. "I'm so sorry. I didn't mean—" But she was laughing too, helpless giggles escaping despite her embarrassment. Another spark popped, then another. Soon the air around them glittered with her uncontrolled magic, and they were both laughing like children, like people who hadn't forgotten how to feel joy. Outside the door, the guards exchanged glances, said nothing, heard nothing. Later, when the laughter faded and the sparks died away, they sat together by the fire. Henrietta had returned to her window seat. Elijah remained in the chair, but he'd turned it to face her. "Why did you do it?" he asked quietly. "That night, you knew what it would cost you." Henrietta met his eyes. "Because you needed help. Because it was the right thing to do." She paused. "Because I chose to. You could have let me die, saved yourself." "No," she said simply. "I couldn't." Elijah studied her, this Omega who had every reason to resent him, fear him, obey the council's orders, and let him die. Instead, she'd risked everything. Not because she had to, because she wanted to. That was the difference, he realized, between duty and choice, between law and love. The council saw her submission as weakness. They saw Omegas as objects to be controlled, assigned, regulated. But Henrietta had made the most powerful choice of all. She'd chosen him. Chosen to save him, and I had chosen to stay when she could have fled. And Elijah, who had spent 7 years choosing duty over desire, law over longing, finally understood what real strength looked like. "You see my restraint," he said slowly. "But you don't see it as coldness, do you?" "No." Henrietta's voice was soft. "I see someone who cares so much that he'll deny himself everything to protect others." Something in Elijah's chest cracked open. "And you see someone who chose you, not someone who was forced." "Yes." They stared at each other across the firelit room, the bond singing between them with a truth neither could deny anymore. If this is forbidden, Elijah thought, then why does it feel like the only honest thing I've ever known? He didn't have an answer, but for the first time in 7 years, he stopped trying to fight it. Chapter 5. Whispers, Warnings, and Withdrawal. The whispers started on the 10th day. Servants noticed the Alpha King visiting the East Tower every evening. Guards reported he stayed for hours. Kitchen staff whispered about 2 dinner trays being sent up instead of 1. By the 12th day, the entire palace knew. The council convened in emergency session. Elder Moira's voice carried through the corridors, shrill with outrage. "He's being seduced! The Omega is using bond magic to manipulate him!" Henrietta heard it all. The East Tower wasn't far enough from the council chambers to escape the accusations. On the 14th day, one of the Omega servants, a kind woman named Lyra, who sometimes brought Henrietta extra blankets, slipped into her room with wild, frightened eyes. "You have to stop," Lyra whispered urgently. "Whatever you're doing with the king, you have to stop." "We're not," Henrietta's cheeks burned. "We just talk. That's all. It doesn't matter what you're doing. It matters what they think you're doing." Lyra gripped Henrietta's hands. "The council is meeting with the regional alphas. They're building a case against you. Bond manipulation, seduction, conspiracy to undermine the throne." Henrietta's blood went cold. "I would never—" "I know. But they don't care about truth. They care about law." Lyra's voice dropped even lower. "And Henrietta, they're talking about execution. Public execution, to prove that no Omega is above the law." That night, when Elijah arrived at twilight as he always did, Henrietta didn't rise from her seat, didn't smile, kept her eyes on the book in her lap even though she hadn't turned a page in an hour. Henrietta? Elijah's voice was uncertain. What's wrong? You shouldn't be here, Your Majesty. The formal title made him flinch. What happened? Nothing happened. This, she gestured between them, was a mistake. The bond was an accident. We should stop pretending otherwise. Elijah crossed the room, kneeling in front of her so she had to meet his eyes. Look at me. She did, and the pain in his gaze nearly broke her. Who warned you? He asked quietly. It doesn't matter. Who? Everyone. Henrietta's composure cracked. The servants, the guards, even the other Omegas. They all say the same thing, that I'm going to get us both killed. I won't let that happen. You can't stop it. She stood abruptly, forcing him back. You're the king, Elijah, but even you have limits. The council has the power to depose you. The regional alphas are already questioning your judgment, and all because you won't stop visiting a forbidden Omega in a tower. You are not forbidden to me. I am to them, and that's what matters. Henrietta wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the fire. I won't be the reason you fall. You won't. Elijah stood, closing the distance between them. His voice dropped to something fierce and desperate. I'll jump. Henrietta's breath caught. What? If there's a choice between keeping this throne and keeping you, I'll jump. I'll walk away from the crown, the kingdom, all of it. I've spent 7 years doing what everyone else wanted, following laws I didn't write, denying myself everything that mattered. His hand rose, hovering near her face, but not quite touching. Still asking permission even now. I won't deny this. I won't deny you. They'll kill me if you abdicate. The council won't let me live as your weakness. The truth of it hung between them. There was no winning, no path forward that didn't end in loss. Then we fight, Elijah said. Together. How? The law is absolute. Laws can be changed. The prophecy... He stopped, realizing he'd never told her. What prophecy? Elijah's jaw tightened. The night I was crowned, a seer told me my mate would be forbidden. That claiming her would cost me everything. I've spent 7 years trying to avoid that fate. He finally touched her, just his fingertips against her cheek, the gentlest contact. But losing you will cost me more. Tears burned in Henrietta's eyes. She wanted to lean into his touch, wanted to believe they could find a way. But reality was a cold, hard thing. Elijah! The door burst open. Commander Ryland stood in the entrance, his face grim. Your Majesty, the council demands your presence immediately. Tell them I'm occupied. It's not a request, my king. Ryland's eyes flicked to Henrietta with something like pity. They've made their decision. The council chamber was packed. Every elder, every regional alpha, every high-ranking pack leader in Ashfall had been summoned. They stood in a semicircle, faces grave and unyielding. Elder Moira stepped forward, a scroll in her hands. Alpha King Elijah Stormborn, she announced formally. The Moon Council, in conjunction with the Regional Assembly, has reached a unanimous decision regarding the future of Ashfall's throne. Elijah's hands clenched at his sides. Beside him, Ryland stood rigid. When your obsession with the Omega healer Henrietta Vale has compromised your judgment and endangered the stability of this kingdom. Therefore, we have arranged a political union to restore order. Moira unrolled the scroll. 3 weeks from tonight, you will participate in a mating ceremony with Lady Seraphine of the Southern Reach, daughter of Alpha Tobias. The bond will be forged through traditional ritual. The union will be binding and permanent. The words hit Elijah like physical blows. I refuse. You don't have that option. Alpha Tobias stepped forward, a tall man with iron-gray hair and cold eyes. My daughter is of pure bloodline, politically advantageous, and eager to serve as Luna. The contracts have been signed. The ceremony is arranged. I refuse. Then you abdicate, Moira said flatly. And we install your cousin Marcus as Alpha King, effective immediately. Elijah's cousin, a brutal man who believed Omegas should be collared like animals, who had argued for harsher regulations, stricter punishments, absolute control. And if I abdicate, Elijah said slowly, what happens to Henrietta? The silence that followed told him everything. She'll be executed, Elder Thaddeus said quietly, almost apologetically, for bond manipulation and attempted seduction of the crown. We cannot allow her to live as proof of your weakness. Elijah's vision went red. You would murder an innocent woman. We would uphold the law. Moira's voice was ice. You have 3 weeks, Your Majesty. Marry Lady Seraphine and secure your throne, or abdicate and watch the Omega die. She paused at the door. Choose wisely. Chapter 6. The ceremony meant to erase her. Elijah agreed to the mating ceremony. He had no choice. The alternative was Henrietta's execution, and he would burn the world before he let that happen. So he signed the contracts, accepted the council's terms, and began preparations to marry a woman he'd never love. He told himself he had 3 weeks to find another way. 3 weeks to change laws, challenge prophecies, break the system that held them both captive. He had 3 days. On the 18th day, guards stormed the East Tower. Henrietta was reading when they burst in, 4 of them, led by a council enforcer she didn't recognize. She barely had time to stand before they seized her arms. What's happening? Henrietta Vale, the enforcer announced. You are under arrest for bond manipulation, use of forbidden magic, and conspiracy to corrupt the Alpha King. I never used. Panic clawed up her throat. Where's Elijah? I need to speak to. The king is in the southern provinces, finalizing arrangements for his mating ceremony. The enforcer's smile was cruel. He doesn't know you're here, and by the time he returns, you won't be. They dragged her from the tower in chains. The holding cell beneath the council chambers was colder than the East Tower had ever been. Henrietta sat on the stone floor, her magic suppressed by silver cuffs that burned her wrists. Hours passed, maybe days. Time lost meaning in the dark. When Elder Moira finally appeared, flanked by 2 other council members, Henrietta barely had the strength to lift her head. The Moon Council has reviewed your case, Moira said without preamble. The evidence of bond manipulation is irrefutable. There is no evidence because I didn't. Silence. Moira's voice cracked like a whip. You will be cleansed at the moon altar tomorrow night. The ritual will remove the corrupted bond and purge the forbidden magic from your system. Henrietta's blood turned to ice. Cleansing wasn't a purification. It was an erasure. The ancient ritual was designed to strip Omegas of their emotional connections, their magical gifts, their very sense of self. It left them hollow, obedient shells who could never bond, never love, never remember what they'd lost. Most Omegas didn't survive it. You can't. Henrietta's voice broke. Please, I'll leave Ash fall. I'll never see him again. Just don't. The ritual is scheduled for midnight tomorrow. Moira turned to leave. Pray to the moon for mercy. You'll find none here. 200 miles south, Elijah reviewed border treaties with Alpha Tobias and tried not to think about Henrietta alone in the East Tower. He'd left her a letter explaining everything, the forced choice, the political necessity, his promise to find a way out. He'd ordered Ryland to check on her daily, to keep her safe until he returned. He told himself 2 weeks wasn't that long. He'd survive the preliminary ceremonies, finalize the political agreements, then return to Ashfall and somehow, impossibly, break a 1,000-year-old law. The bond pulsed weakly in his chest. Henrietta's presence was a constant hum at the back of his mind, quieter with distance, but never absent. Then, at noon on the 2nd day, the bond went silent. Elijah froze mid-sentence, his hand clenching around the treaty document. The absence was so sudden, so complete, that for a moment he thought he'd imagined it. "Your Majesty?" Alpha Tobias frowned. "Are you unwell?" Elijah didn't answer. He reached for the bond, searching for that familiar warmth, that steady presence that had become as necessary as breathing. Nothing. Terror seized him. He was on his feet before he realized he'd moved. "I have to go. The negotiations aren't finished." "Now!" Elijah was already striding toward the door. "Rylan, get the horses ready. We leave immediately." Rylan appeared confused. "My king, what?" "Something's wrong with Henrietta." They rode through the night, pushing the horses to the brink of collapse. Elijah's mind raced with possibilities, each worse than the last. Had she tried to escape? Been attacked? Fallen ill? He didn't consider that the council would move against her. Not yet. Not while he was cooperating with their demands. He should have known better. They reached Ashfall at dawn. Elijah went straight to the East Tower, taking the stairs 3 at a time. The room was empty. "Where is she?" Elijah spun on the guards stationed outside. "Where's Henrietta?" The guards exchanged nervous glances. We don't know, Your Majesty. The council's enforcers took her 2 days ago." 2 days. The same time the bond had gone silent, Elijah's hands shook with barely contained rage. "Took her where?" "We weren't told." He was running before they finished speaking. Down the stairs, through the palace corridors, past startled servants and stammering officials. The council chambers were empty. The holding cells were empty. Then he heard it. A low, weird rhythmic chanting coming from outside, the moon altar. Elijah burst through the palace doors into the courtyard. Moonlight bathed the ancient stone altar in silver light. The entire Moon Council stood in a circle around it, their voices raised in the old language. And in the center, bound to the altar with silver chains, was Henrietta. She was barely conscious, her head lolling forward, her healer's robes stained with blood. The moonlight itself seemed to be draining her, pulling magic, memories, life force from her body in visible streams of light. The cleansing ritual. "No!" Elijah's roar shattered the chanting. The council members turned, startled. Elder Moira stepped forward, her expression triumphant. "Your Majesty, you weren't expected back until—" "Stop the ritual, now. The ritual cannot be stopped once begun. The moon has accepted her offering." Elijah started forward, but silver barriers flared around the altar, magical wards designed to keep anyone from interfering. He slammed against them, felt them burn his hands, didn't care. "Henrietta!" He could see her eyes fluttering, her lips moving soundlessly. "Henrietta, hold on!" The moonlight grew brighter, more intense. Henrietta's back arched against the chains. A scream tore from her throat, raw and broken and fading. Her magic was draining away. Her memories, her bond, her life. Elijah threw himself against the barrier again, feeling his skin blister. "Let me through. She's dying." "The law is absolute," Moira said coldly. "No one may touch an Omega undergoing cleansing." The moonlight flickered violently, pulsing in rhythm with Henrietta's weakening heartbeat. Seng and Elijah realized with horrifying clarity that he was about to watch his mate die, and the law, the goddamn law he'd obeyed his entire life, wouldn't even let him hold her hand. Chapter 7. Claimed in Defiance. The moonlight was killing her. Elijah could see it. The way Henrietta's skin had gone translucent, her veins visible beneath like a map of fading light. Her magic poured out of her in silver streams, dissipating into the night air. Her eyes had rolled back, showing only whites. She had minutes, maybe less. The silver barrier shimmered before him, impenetrable. Ancient magic, designed to be absolute, to prevent anyone, even a king, from interfering with the moon's judgment. But the prophecy had never said he couldn't save her. It had only said claiming her would cost him everything. Elijah stepped back from the barrier. Sale looked at the council members surrounding the altar, their faces lit with righteous satisfaction. Looked at Moira, who watched Henrietta die with the cold certainty of law. Then he looked at Henrietta, broken, bleeding, disappearing, and made his choice. "I invoke sovereign claim," Elijah said, his voice carrying across the courtyard with absolute authority. The chanting faltered. The council members turned to him, confusion flickering across their faces. "There is no such," Moira began. "There is." Elijah's eyes blazed gold. "The sovereign claim, ancient law, older than the Moon Council itself. When a ruling alpha claims a mate before the moon, no barrier can stand between them. No law can prevent the bond. That law was abolished centuries ago. It was never abolished. It was forgotten." Elijah stepped forward. The barrier flickered. "But I am the Alpha King of Ashfall. I am the direct descendant of the first wolves, and I claim what is mine." "You can't!" Moira's composure cracked. "She's undergoing cleansing. The moon has already accepted—" "The moon hasn't accepted anything." Elijah's voice dropped to something dangerous. "You forced this. You twisted the law. You condemned an innocent woman because she threatened your control." He took another step. The barrier wavered, silver light crackling with instability. "Do not touch her," Elder Thaddeus shouted. "If you cross that barrier, you violate sacred law." "Your law," Elijah said quietly. "Or hers." He gestured to Henrietta, whose lips had gone blue, whose breathing had become shallow gasps. "She saved my life," Elijah continued, his voice raw. "She asked permission before touching me, even when I was dying. But she chose to break your law because mercy mattered more than rules, and you're killing her for it." The barrier was weakening. Elijah could feel it, the magic responding to something deeper than council authority, responding to the bond, to truth, to a claim that predated their corruption of the old ways. "I won't let her die alone," Elijah said. "I won't let her die believing she was disposable." "If you touch her, you lose your crown," Moira shrieked. Elijah met her eyes. "I know." He stepped through the barrier. Silver magic exploded around him, searing his skin, burning through his clothes. The pain was excruciating, every nerve ending on fire, his alpha strength the only thing keeping him upright. He heard the council shouting, felt guards grabbing at him, trying to pull him back. He shook them off and kept walking. Henrietta lay on the altar, barely breathing. The moonlight still drained her, relentless and cold. Up close, Elijah could see the silver chains had burned into her wrists, could smell the copper-sweet scent of her blood. "Do not touch her." Moira's voice was desperate now. "The cleansing will kill you both." Elijah knelt beside the altar, reached out with trembling hands, cradled Henrietta's face. Her blood stained his palms, warm and precious, and proof that she was still alive, still fighting, still here. "Henrietta," he whispered, "I'm here. I've got you." Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused and fading. "Elijah?" His name was barely a breath. You shouldn't. I should have done this weeks ago." He leaned closer, his forehead touching hers. "I claim you, Henrietta Vale, not as king. Not by council law or political arrangement." The bond stirred weakly in his chest. "I claim you because you chose me when you didn't have to. Because you see my restraint as protection, not coldness. Because when you laugh, the world makes sense." His voice broke. "I claim you because losing the crown means nothing if I lose you. Elijah, I claim you," he said again, louder this time, "as my mate, my equal, my choice." The bond ignited, not the gentle warmth of their first connection, not the controlled magic of careful touches. This was an explosion, raw and primal and absolutely unstoppable. Golden light erupted from where their skin met, flooding outward in waves that shattered the silver chains, cracked the ancient altar stone, sent the council members stumbling backward. The moon answered. Not with the cold, draining light of the cleansing ritual, with warmth, with recognition, with blessing. The moonlight that had been killing Henrietta reversed, pouring back into her, returning her magic, her memories, her strength. The bond between them flared brilliant and blinding, visible to every wolf in the courtyard as a golden thread connecting their hearts. The altar shattered completely, stone exploding into fragments. Elijah caught Henrietta as she fell, pulling her against his chest, shielding her from the debris. Around them, the council members collapsed, some from the shockwave of magic, others from the sheer impossibility of what they were witnessing. The laws they'd built their power on were unraveling. And the moon, ancient, wise, unchanging, had chosen the bond over their rules. Henrietta gasped, drawing in a full breath for the first time in days. Her magic flooded back, her color returning, her eyes clearing. She stared up at Elijah, wonder and disbelief warring on her face. You gave up your crown. No. Elijah's thumb brushed her cheek, wiping away blood and tears. I claimed my mate. There's a difference. Around them, the courtyard had gone utterly silent. The council members who could still stand watched in shock. The guards had lowered their weapons, uncertain. Even the moon seemed to hold its breath. Then Elder Thaddeus, old, weary, and wiser than Moira would ever be, began to laugh. The sovereign claim, he said, shaking his head. By the first wolves, he actually invoked the sovereign claim. It's not valid! Moira struggled to her feet, her face twisted with fury. The law clearly states... The law, Thaddeus interrupted, states that when a ruling alpha claims a mate before the moon with true intent, the bond is sacred and binding. No council can dissolve it. No ceremony can replace it. He looked at Elijah, something like respect in his eyes. He didn't break the law, Moira. He followed the oldest one. The moon pulsed once, brilliant and affirming. Henrietta began to cry, not from pain this time, but from relief, from joy, from the overwhelming reality that she was alive and he was here and they'd survived. Elijah held her tighter, buried his face in her hair, and finally, let himself believe they might actually have a future. Chapter 8. The Truth Written in Moonlight. The palace archives hadn't been opened in 60 years. Elder Thaddeus led the way through dust-covered corridors. It passed shelves stacked with scrolls and bound manuscripts that predated the current Moon Council by centuries. Elijah followed, Henrietta at his side, her hand firmly clasped in his. Behind them, Commander Rylan and a handful of trusted advisors bore witness. Elder Moira had been confined to her chambers pending investigation. The rest of the council walked on significantly thinner ice. Here. Thaddeus pulled a leather-bound volume from a high shelf, its pages yellowed with age. The original text of the Sovereign Claim Law, written by the first wolves themselves. He laid it open on a reading table. The ancient script was barely legible, but the meaning was clear. When a ruling alpha claims a mate with true intent before the moon, Thaddeus read aloud, the bond is sacred and absolute. No law of wolves may supersede it, and no council may dissolve it. The moon recognizes truth over tradition, love over law. Elijah's jaw tightened. So the law never forbade true bonds. No. Thaddeus pulled another scroll, this one more recent, perhaps 200 years old. But this is the version the council has been using. Notice the additions. The corrupted version was littered with restrictions. Omegas could not initiate bonds. Councils must approve all royal unions. Touch between alpha kings and unmarked Omegas was forbidden unless authorized. They changed it. Henrietta whispered, reading over Elijah's shoulder. "They twisted the original law to control us." "Not they," Thaddeus said wearily. "We. I sat on that council for 40 years and never questioned it. Never looked at the original texts." His eyes met Elijah's. "The prophecy you were given, Your Majesty, about your mate being forbidden, it wasn't a warning against claiming her. It was a warning that the council would call her forbidden." Elijah's hand tightened around Henrietta's. 7 years. 7 years of restraint, of denial, of believing that loving her would destroy everything, because a corrupted council had convinced him their power mattered more than truth. "The prophecy said claiming her would cost me everything," Elijah said quietly, "and it did." Thaddeus gestured to the shattered remains of council authority. "You lost their version of order, their corrupted laws, their control." He paused. "But you gained what matters." Elijah looked down at Henrietta, at the woman who had saved his life twice, once with healing magic, once by being brave enough to let him save hers. "Yes," he said softly. "Then I did." The reforms began immediately. Elijah addressed the kingdom from the palace steps, Henrietta standing beside him, not behind, not hidden, beside him, visible and honored. "For too long," Elijah announced, his voice carrying across the assembled crowd, "we have allowed fear to masquerade as law. We have regulated Omegas not to protect them, but to control them. We have prevented bonds not to preserve strength, but to preserve power." Murmurs rippled through the crowd, some shocked, some hopeful. Effective immediately, all Omegas in Ashfall have the right to choose their own mates. Council approval is no longer required. Arranged bonds are abolished unless both parties consent freely. Elijah's eyes blazed gold. "And any wolf, alpha, beta, or omega, who forces a bond or prevents a true bond will face exile." The crowd erupted, and some cheered, others protested. But the Omegas wept with relief. Henrietta watched them, her own tears threatening. For the first time in her life, she wasn't seen as disposable, as useful only when needed and invisible otherwise. She mattered. They all mattered. That night, in the quiet of Elijah's private chambers, no longer separated, no longer forbidden, they finally talked about what came next. "Are you afraid?" Henrietta asked, curled against his side on the window seat overlooking Ashfall. "Terrified." Elijah's honesty surprised her. "I've never ruled without the council's structure, never made decisions based on what I wanted instead of what I was told I should want." "You saved me." Henrietta's fingers traced patterns on his chest, feeling his heartbeat steady beneath her palm. "You chose love over law. That's not weak. So, Elijah, that's the strongest thing you've ever done." He caught her hand, brought it to his lips. "You taught me that. You, who asked permission even when breaking the law to save my life. You showed me that choice, real choice, is what makes us strong." Henrietta had spent her entire life believing she was disposable, useful for healing, for serving, for filling whatever role others needed, but never valuable for simply existing, never chosen for who she was rather than what she could provide. "I'm still afraid," she admitted, "that one day you'll realize I'm not worth what you gave up." "Henrietta," Elijah shifted so they were facing each other, his hands framing her face. "You are worth everything. The crown, the council's approval, the easy path. I'd give it all up again in a heartbeat." His thumb brushed her cheekbone. You were never disposable. You were always essential. I just couldn't admit it until I almost lost you." She kissed him then, soft and sweet and full of promise. The bond hummed between them, content and certain. "What happens now?" she asked when they parted. "Now," Elijah said, "we do this properly. Not because the council demands it, not because of politics or prophecy." He took both her hands in his. I want to bond with you, Henrietta Vale. I want to stand before the moon and our people and claim you, not in defiance this time, but in joy. I want everyone to know you're my mate, my Luna, my choice. Not a ceremony, Henrietta said softly. A vow. Yes. Elijah's smile was genuine, unguarded. A vow. Just us, the moon, and the truth we both know. She didn't need time to think, didn't need to consider options or weigh consequences. And for the first time in her life, the choice was simple. Yes, Henrietta whispered. I choose you. Not because I have to, because I want to. The bond flared brilliant between them, no longer forbidden, no longer fought. Just true. 3 days later, at the moon altar, rebuilt, cleansed, reclaimed, Elijah and Henrietta stood hand in hand before a crowd of witnesses. No council presiding, no political contracts, no arranged pageantry, just two wolves choosing each other. I claim you, Elijah said, his voice steady and sure, as my mate, my equal, my heart. I claim you, Henrietta echoed, squeezing his hands, as my mate, my choice, my home. The moon blessed them with silver light, not draining this time, but celebrating. And when they kissed, the bond solidified completely, permanent, unbreakable, chosen. Around them, the freed Omegas of Ashfall wept and cheered. The old laws were dead. The future had finally begun. Chapter 9. Where his heart always knew her name. 6 months later. The healing wing had never been so full of light. Henrietta moved through the rows of beds with practiced grace, her hands glowing softly as she mended a young pup's broken wrist. The child's mother watched with gratitude that still made Henrietta's throat tight, not the desperate relief of someone with no other options, but the genuine appreciation of someone who had chosen to bring their child here. There. Henrietta released the boy's arm, now fully healed. Try to stay out of trees for at least a week, The pup grinned, flexing his fingers experimentally. Thank you, Luna. Luna. The title still felt strange sometimes. Not unwelcome, just unexpected. But even after 6 months of wearing it, as Henrietta walked through the palace corridors toward the royal chambers, she noticed the changes everywhere. Omega healers worked alongside beta nurses without fear of reprimand. A young Omega woman walked hand in hand with her chosen mate, an alpha from the northern packs, their bond mark visible and celebrated rather than hidden. The council chambers, once filled with elders who hoarded power, now hosted open assemblies where any wolf could voice concerns. Ashfall had stabilized, not without growing pains. Change never came easily. Some of the old guard still grumbled about tradition. Some alphas resented the loss of arranged bonds that had guaranteed them mates regardless of compatibility. But the kingdom was healing, transforming into something stronger than the rigid hierarchy that had nearly destroyed it. And at the center of it all was the Alpha King who had chosen love over law, and the Omega healer who had taught him that choice was the greatest strength of all. Henrietta found Elijah in their private chambers, standing at the window overlooking the city. He'd shed his formal robes for simple clothes, his hair loose around his shoulders. He looked younger like this, less like the untouchable king he'd been forced to be, more like the man he'd always wanted to become. Long day? She asked softly. He turned, and his entire face transformed with a smile that still made her heart skip. Better now. She crossed to him, fitting herself against his side as naturally as breathing. His arm came around her waist, pulling her close. 6 months, and the simple freedom to touch him still felt like a miracle. The northern pack sent their tribute, Elijah said, pressing a kiss to her temple, and a rather pointed letter thanking you for the new healing clinics. They're thanking you. You're the one who funded them. I signed the order. You designed them, trained the healers, and personally visited each one to ensure they met your standards. His hand traced idle patterns on her hip. The kingdom loves you, Henrietta, almost as much as I do. She tilted her head to look up at him. Almost? Not even close. He kissed her properly this time, slow and thorough and full of promise. How was the healing wing? Busy. Good. Henrietta smiled against his lips. A pup broke his wrist climbing trees. His mother chose to bring him to me instead of the closer clinic in the lower district. Because you're the best healer in Ashfall. Because she trusts me. Henrietta's voice softened. Because she knows I'll treat her son as precious, not disposable. Elijah's arms tightened around her. He understood what that meant, how far they'd come from the kingdom that had seen Omegas as useful objects rather than valuable people. Come here. He led her to the chaise by the fireplace, settling back against the cushions and pulling her down with him. Henrietta curled against his chest, her head resting over his heart. His hands, those hands the council had once declared too sacred to touch an Omega, held her openly, possessively, tenderly. One traced through her hair, the other rested on her waist, thumb stroking slow circles. I was thinking, Elijah murmured into the comfortable silence, about that night in the East Tower, when you made sparks fly everywhere and we couldn't stop laughing. Henrietta smiled against his chest. The guards pretended not to hear. They absolutely heard. Ryland told me later they'd placed bets on how long I'd last before breaking protocol. His chest rumbled with quiet laughter. They lost significant money when I held out for 3 more days. You were very disciplined. I was terrified. Elijah's hand stilled in her hair. Of what loving you would cost. Of what losing you would mean. Of being the king everyone needed instead of the man I wanted to be. Henrietta shifted to look at him. And now? Now I know the truth. He cupped her face gently. Being the man I want to be made me the king Ashfall actually needed. She kissed him, soft and sweet and absolutely certain. The bond hummed between them, content and unshakable. 6 months bonded, and it still felt new every time. Still felt like the most honest thing in her life. I love you, Henrietta whispered against his lips. I love you. Elijah pulled her back against his chest, settling them both into comfortable silence. Outside, the moon rose over Ashfall, silver and eternal and witnessing. The same moon that had nearly drained Henrietta's life now blessed their bond every night. The same moon that had watched Elijah choose love over law now watched them choose each other, again and again, in 1,000 small moments. They once said touching her was forbidden. They said an alpha king's hands were sacred, way meant for crowns and treaties and carefully controlled political gestures. They said Omegas were to be regulated, assigned, kept at a distance that preserved hierarchy over humanity. But Elijah's hands held Henrietta like she was precious, like she was chosen, like she was exactly where she belonged, and she was. Not because the law permitted it, not because the council approved, but because they had both been brave enough to choose truth over tradition, love over law, each other over everything else. Henrietta rested her head on Elijah's chest, right over his heart, the heart that had stopped once and restarted with her name on its beat. His fingers tangled in her hair. His other hand settled over her hip, anchoring her close. They once said touching her was forbidden. Now, she was the only thing that ever felt right. Tikwin. The end epilogue. 3 years later, the nursery was filled with afternoon light and the sound of a child's laughter. Henrietta sat on the floor, watching as their daughter, 2 years old, golden-eyed and absolutely fearless, toddled toward Elijah with outstretched arms. "Papa!" Elijah caught her mid-stumble, swinging her up with a grin that made Henrietta's heart overflow. Their daughter giggled, tiny hands patting his cheeks. "She has your determination," Elijah said, settling beside Henrietta with their daughter in his lap. "She has your stubbornness," Henrietta countered, leaning into his shoulder. Outside the nursery windows, ashfall thrived. The Omega rights reforms had spread to neighboring kingdoms. The healing clinics Henrietta had established now trained healers across the continent. And the laws that had once forbidden love had been rewritten into protection, ensuring that no wolf would ever again be forced to choose between duty and their heart. Their daughter yawned, settling against Elijah's chest. Within minutes, she was asleep. "She's perfect," Henrietta whispered. "Like her mother." Elijah kissed the top of Henrietta's head. "Have I told you today that I love you?" "At least 3 times," Henrietta smiled. "But I'll never get tired of hearing it." "Good, because I'll never stop saying it." They sat together in the peaceful silence, their daughter sleeping between them, the bond humming with contentment. Once, they had been forbidden. Now, they were everything. They say the best love stories start with impossible choices. This one started with 2 people brave enough to choose truth and each other over everything else. If this moonbound love touched your heart, I'd love to hear from you in the comments. And subscribe for more stories where love conquers even the most ancient laws.